There is no doubt that dice can be a great time saver when it comes to card making, especially for interactive cards. But what if we don't have any specialty dies? The good news is there is a lot that can be done using just basic dies, a trimmer and a scoreboard. This card here is super easy. I'm starting here from a 5x7 sheet of black cardstock and I'm creating two score lines, one at 1 inch and the other one at 6 inches. I'm going to repeat the same steps with the second panel, but for this one right here, I'm going to use a circle die to cut an opening in the center, and then I decided to spice things up a little bit by splattering the front with some mica sprays while using some masking tape on the sides to keep those protected. For the other panel, I did some super quick ink blending using white pigment ink and a cloud stencil, and the idea here is to create a scene. The images I'm going to use today are from the Halloween sign and spooky house stamp sets by Paper Nest Dolls, and these are available both as rubber and as digital stamps, and I'm using the digital version for my cards today. Paper Nest Dolls is the sponsor of today's video, and to celebrate this collaboration, Christine is offering 15% off her store with code SPOOKY15, and you can find all the information in the description box down below, so make sure to check that out if you're interested. Back to the card, to create a support for my spooky house, I used a strip of black cardstock that measures 7 by 1/2 inch, and I scored it at 1 and 6 inches like I did for the larger panels. I used a grassy border die here just to make the thing a little bit more interesting, and then I snipped off part of the flaps so that I could position these wherever I wanted inside my shadow box card. I then assembled the shadow box by gluing the sides together, and I added the Halloween sign to the front and the bat to the back of the box to create a little bit of visual depth in my card. Because the house is pretty tall, I noticed that the weight was causing it to sort of fall towards the background, so I quickly took a tiny strip of cardstock and I scored it to create two little flaps so that I could adhere one to the back of the house and the other one to the background. And this creates a support for the house that still lets me fold my shadow box flat so that I can fit it inside an envelope. For this one here, I only used the bats in the Halloween sign stamp sets, and I thought that this was a great way to stretch the set. I cut my card base to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and again I created a cloudy sky with white pigment ink and a stencil. I cut a second panel to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and then I took 3 different sizes of circles. I used the mid-size to cut a circle of my rectangular panel, and I added again some splatters with mica sprays. With the smallest and the largest one, I die cut 2 more circles, and this will create the spinning mechanism. I added a die cut sentiment to the small one, and then I adhered it to the big one using 2 layers of foam squares. I nested the spinning mechanism behind the front panel, and then I used 1 layer of foam squares to adhere this to the card background. Again, using some more foam squares, I adhered the bats to the track that's now formed on the front of the card, and to make things a little bit more sturdy, I also adhered the bottom of the bats to the inner circle, and this way it's much easier to spin everything around. For this card here, I started from an A2 card base and I used a rounded rectangle to create a cut in the middle. We don't want to cut it all the way though, so I used the good old trick of partial die cutting, where you have the part that you don't want to cut hanging off of your cutting plates. This creates a nice flap, and the next step is to create score lines. One will be about 1/4 inch away from the bottom of the flap, the other one at 3 3/4 inches, and the third one at the base of the flap. And guess what? I decorated this panel with a cloudy sky and white pigment ink. Next, I created the pull tab. I used the same rectangle die to die cut some more black cardstock, and I used again the partial die cutting technique to be able to extend this rectangle so that it would be as long as this section right here. I gave my pull tab the same cloudy stencil treatment, and I also used a small circular die to die cut a notch off of the front panel. I adhered the two elements together, making sure to only add glue to the bottom fold of the front one so that everything else is free to move. I used the spooky house again for this card because I thought it was just perfect, and I made sure to only add glue to the midsection of the moving element, because otherwise nothing will really move. We can now adhere everything to our card base, which is again some black cardstock that I splattered with some mica sprays. And when you adhere this, just make sure that the pull tab is free of glue, because again, we want to make sure that we are able to move this. I added a die cut sentiment to the inside of the card, and that will be revealed once the recipient pulls the pull tab. And if you are into new ways of using up what you have, you should definitely check out this video right here. Here I explore some different techniques for distress oxides to try and breathe new life into this craft room staple.